Record to the cloud. All right. So yeah, like the test said, right? Today we're here to talk about error boundaries and what they are. So let's start by making a project and going from there. So I'm going to share my screen. You can code along with me. 6.4, this is in our 6.4 lecture notes repository, and I'm putting that in our extra section. So let's go ahead and create a new project. So create React app, and I'm going to call this error boundaries. Okay, and let that load. I know that's going to take a little while, but while that's happening, let's just talk about this a little. So first thing you should be aware of is error boundaries are one of the only things that hooks have not replaced. Okay, so error boundaries are still a good argument for class components for the time being. Eventually, there might be a hook for error boundaries, but at this point in time, the only way you can have error boundaries is by using it as a class component. Okay, that's the first thing to be aware of. The next thing is there are two methods, lifecycle methods, that can make something in error boundaries, and I'll stop the share and write those down for us while we're waiting for the other thing to load. And that is component did catch. Component did catch takes an error and error info. I'm just going to write info. I know it's small, but I said what it says. This is mostly used for keeping track of errors, like sending errors. Send error to a logging service. So on bigger applications, probably not one that we're writing, there are logging services that when you have an error, you could send this error to that service so you can keep track of all the errors that are occurring within your application. I think Sentry is one of those types of services, but I don't know many off the top of my head. The other main lifecycle method is called static, and then get derived state from error. I'm sorry, it's a small whiteboard. Get derived state from error. I'll write it all down when we start coding too, don't worry. This is used for fallback UI. Okay, so if there's an error that occurs and we want something else to be seen, we could use that. So let's.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What does it mean fallback UI?
So I'm gonna show that in a second. That's a great question. And we will see that. So let's just CD into this. I'm going to open this up. And get this party started with npm start. All right, and we are left with something like this. Okay, pretty classic React looking site. Like naked mole rats, good question, says Henry. Okay, and let's just also look at the code. Just gonna toggle between these like that, but I like it in this order. So, okay, great. So let's start with our app. Let's clear out all this junk that we usually have. Just test that we're connected and everything looks hunky-dory. Awesome. All right, so let's pretend that we have some heroes component. Let's start with that. So I'm gonna make a component. Or I'll just start with a file. And let's call this heroes. And heroes is just going to be a no big deal kind of component. And it's going to take in a hero as its prop. And all it's going to do is return that hero's name. Okay, it's just going to return that hero. Really not doing much. Okay, right? Just a component, takes in hero prop, displays its name. And we'll go to our app, and let's import our hero component. And let's say I have my hero, and this will be Superman. We'll say Joker, and we'll say Wonder Woman. Okay, right? These are all, well, are these all heroes? I don't know. I would say no, right? I would say the Joker's not really a hero.
Well, to some.
Sure, but Joker's not really a hero. It's not a comic book hero.
Nah, he's
So
not.
what if we do this check, like, you know, and this is obviously a little ham-fisted. This isn't exactly how you typically would program, but let's say if I said if hero is equal to Joker, I'm just going to throw an error. And I'll say Joker is not a hero. Okay. What do we expect to happen before we actually look at the code? Who can tell me what we're expecting to see on the other side of the page? Henry says an error. Okay. What will the error be, Henry? Joker's not a hero. Okay, yeah, right? So we go here, we see this big error page that we usually see. No surprises. If this X here is, so no matter what, when you're in React development mode, React wants to make you as aware of errors as possible. So it does this big full screen thing. But if you wanted to see what your app would look like in production without actually pushing and building it and sending it to production, right? You can just hit this X. And so this is what our app looks like, right? To a user. It's completely blank because the app is completely broken. Now, this is what our error boundaries is going to try to do, is we're going to check and try to have a fallback UI, which is a different thing for us to see in the event that something went wrong. That's the goal for today. So let's build up an error boundary. So error boundaries are what kind of component?
Component they catch.
Yeah, okay, that's the lifecycle method. And what kind of component is it?
Class component.
I heard class component. Who was that? Was it Maria?
Yeah.
Nice. Right, so we're gonna go back to writing class components. Let's see if I can remember it. Error boundaries, right? So this doesn't have to be called error boundaries. It's good to have, you know, it's a pretty descriptive name of what it is, but it definitely doesn't need that. So we'll say extends component, right? I think they look something like this. And we can take out component. And we can export that here. Oh, it's not gonna fill. There we go. Okay, right, so this is our class component. What does every class component require? Let's see if we remember.
A super
Render.
Right, okay, so everybody write in the chat what you think a class component requires. All right, 3, 2, 1. Okay, wow. Great responses here. Thank you, Isaiah Henry, Amy Nilbert, Danny, Douglas, Doug, Jonathan, Johann. I'll just say Anama, Brutus, Nilbert, Deja, Maria, Kevin. Awesome. So I did see it for a couple people. I saw it for Brutus and Doug and Danny and Isaiah, I think, which is in order for a component to work in the class, it needs render. That is the only method. That's the only lifecycle method that is absolutely required of a class component, right? I saw state in there. I saw constructor. You don't actually need those in order to have a class component that works. You just have to have a render. Okay, that's the rule. You can have a state, you can have constructor, but you don't technically need that. I can prove that here too. Air, boundary, comp, right? And I can just import this into our app here. I think I called it that. I'll just comment these out for now. That is from here. Why is that? Let's see. Parsing error component has already been declared. I don't know. I'll just write it old school.
Line 1.
What is it?
On line 1.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thank you. Totally right. Render method should have a return statement. Oh yeah, I forgot that. It's been way too long in hooks. Okay. All right, so this is our error boundaries, right? And we see we have a class component that works, right? Just the render. That's all that's absolutely required. So we can add state, and I think we're going to need that for our error boundaries. So I'm going to add a state. I'm not going to put it in a constructor. I don't need to. So I'm just going to say error or has error, and I'm going to initiate that to false. So in my render statement, I'm going to check if there's an error or if there's not an error. And if there is an error, I'm going to render something else. So I'll say, hey, like if has this.state dot has error. So in the event that I actually do have an error, I'm going to return something else, right? Maybe I'll just return the words something went wrong. But in the event that I don't have an error, I don't actually want to return this. I'm going to return a React fragment. And inside that, I'm just going to return our whatever it's supposed to be. So this dot props dot children. So what does this mean? If I'm going to be calling this dot props dot children, what kind of word would I use to describe? What would I use to describe an error boundaries? What kind of component is that? I know it's a class component, but even more specifically, what kind of component is it if I'm just going to use it to render children?
A wrapper component?
Yeah, it's a wrapper component is one word for it. What is the other word I'm looking for? Oh, Nilber with the acronyms. If someone can crack his acronyms, they'll have the answer themselves.
Higher order component?
That's right. This is a high order component. Remember, a high order component is just a component that takes other components as its arguments and injects some kind of code in it usually, or does something with it. But its pure purpose is to still render the children for the most part. So this is a high order component. So that means I'm actually calling it wrong here. I would be calling it like this and have to stick things inside. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll see, well, we'll see nothing's going to change. When we go here, we'll still see errors. Joker's not a hero. If we look, the screen is still blank. But the screen is still blank because we're not doing anything. There's nothing that we're doing to update has error, right? So this is where these lifecycle methods come in. So the most interesting lifecycle method, so that's the one I'm going to focus on mostly today, is called static get derived state from error. Now, for something to be an error boundary, it has to have at least one of those two life cycle methods: get derived state from error, and we'll add component did catch, which I think just takes in error and error info. Okay, so if a component has either one of these two lifecycle methods or both, it is an error boundary. Okay, no matter how you slice it, dice it, mice it, right? And if we have our get derived state props from error, this technically takes in the error. Maybe you use it, maybe you don't. And this is a cool, this doesn't exactly work the same. You might be inclined to say this dot set state and then has error true. This might be your inclination, but when you have these static get derived states, you actually return your next state. So instead of doing that, I actually am going to return has error true. So these work slightly different, and that's okay. So we go ahead and say static get derived state from error. And when we hit this, that means we're only going to hit this if we have an error in one of its children. You can think of it a little bit as like try catch, but it's only going to catch things from its children. This replaces this because this is for errors that occur in a declarative manner, which is essentially like React is very declarative. You say exactly the kind of code you want to see. And if an error is thrown, this will catch that error. But it has to be only in a child. If an error were to occur in this component itself, this would not catch it. It cannot catch its own error. It can only catch the error of a child, like a good parent, right? Well, parents should be able to catch their errors too, but like a bad parent, but like a bad person, but a good parent. Right? That's our error boundaries. So let's try this now. And this is essentially, this is going to be our fallback UI. So let's go. So we get this. Now this is only because we're in developer mode. Remember, no matter what errors get thrown, we will see it like this. But when we close this, we'll see that we actually now have our fallback UI, which is something went wrong. So what is this like? What does this mean for us, right? Well, it means now our application doesn't actually have to break in production and just show the user nothing when there's an error. We can actually have them see something, right? We could still potentially see a nav bar and let them navigate somewhere else, or see anything that you want. Something that I should note is right now we have this error boundary wrapped around all of these, right? So if any error that occurs in any of these is wiped clean. And then we go to the error boundary and it catches from all of these. Now, how specific you want to make your error boundaries is up to you. I don't recommend like going absolutely crazy, but it's not bad to be more specific, right? Because maybe this was a whole list of like 1,000 items on an Amazon order, right? And if one list isn't there and it throws an error for some reason, maybe you don't want to not show anything. Maybe you just don't want to show that one item, right? Because there's still 999 good items to show. So if we want to do that, you can be more specific with your error boundary. So let's go ahead and wrap all of these components in an error boundary and see what happens. Okay. Okay, so now we have all of these error boundaries. So can somebody tell me what they think we'll see when we go to the other page? What the expectation might be now?
I think we will see Superman, then the error message, then Wonder Woman.
Awesome. Great instincts. Right? So we get this page kind of irrelevant right now. And we get exactly what you said, right? Superman, something went wrong, and then Wonder Woman. So now we were actually able to control the errors. Inside of the last error method, lifecycle method that I haven't really talked about, his component did catch. It's really not that interesting unless you have a logging service. So this is like where you would send error to logging service somewhere else. For now, I can just console log the error, whoops, and error info. But the fact is like in development mode, we already get these errors, right? So it's not really going to look very different. Instead, now we just get it twice, right? We get this, and then we get it again. So this is really a lot more for like a logging service. This is what you'll use a lot more while you have a small app for a fallback UI. Okay, any questions so far?
Is there a reason why you can't use this in a functional component?
The reason is the React team I think just hasn't made it yet. They do plan to at some point, but they just haven't. I know, not the greatest answer in the world, but still an answer. Doesn't exist. It's not in React.
So the error boundary has to be a class, but any component that's a children of the error boundary, it doesn't matter if it's class or function, right?
Right. It does not matter at all for the children, whether or not they're class or function. So you should probably keep writing functional components with hooks, because that seems to be where React is going. But there is still lots of legacy code, so you should know like class components. But if you're writing new code, not really a great argument to why you would want to write new components with classes. Except for error boundaries. It's got to be a class. Any other questions on this? Okay, great. Well, then I'm going to challenge you. Okay, so the challenge here, I'll stop sharing. So for the next, let's do it in 15 minutes. So in 15 minutes, write a counter app that throws an error if the number is, I'm writing while I'm talking, equal to 5. Handle that error, right? So write your own error boundaries. You can personalize it, have fun with the message. So when you're clicking on counter and you're just like going up by 1, if you hit 5, or how about if you hit 5, throw an error. If you get that, add a second button to add by 2, and then if you hit anything that's divisible by 5, should throw an error. That's like a wonky counter. Okay? Any questions on the expectation?
So you want the counter to still be viewable and you can interact with it when they hit that error for 5 or anything divisible by 5.
Oh no, if they hit 5, just you can have it say something like, just don't break the entire app.
Okay.
If you have a second counter, wonky counter, that one doesn't break when the first one breaks. Just explore it, that's all. I don't really care about the specifics of the project. You can also make anything else you want right now that's going to throw an error. All right, so let's do that for 15 minutes. I'll pause the recording. We are in the 3 and 4 range, mostly. Pretty good bell-shaped curve. Tell me about these scores so I can have a little bit more of an understanding. Oh, who's Carol Baskin? Oh, Samantha. This is getting interesting. What went well? What didn't go well? Tell me about it.
Installing React app.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that took some time.
Okay. Fair. What else? Was any of the group successful in actually finishing?
No, I thought we were close, but when we were creating the input, like something just didn't work. Felt like we were close.
Okay, I gotcha. So nobody finished. We're gonna go back in, but we're gonna do that in a second. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna work on this code with you until we get to the error boundaries, because I have a feeling most people just built out like the count component and maybe didn't finish. So I'm gonna build that with us. So let's call this counter.js and go from here, right? So this is just a React component. Let's just export default that. Whoops. This doesn't need to take in any props. We know it's going to use state, right? Because it's going to be keeping track of a count. So let's go ahead and start that. So let's call this count and set count. And this will be our use state, which will initialize with 0. And right, the real thing is we would be rendering, whoops, now I'm writing class components. Let's say we render a div and all it does is we'll have another div and it's just going to show the count. Let's see if we're there so far, and we'll go into our app. And for now, we'll stick this at the top of the other. I'll comment the sound. And we'll just have our counter. Okay, so we should have, oh, it moved on me. Put this back. Okay, nothing was returned from render.
You still have the counter.
I don't think you did. You export it?
Oh,
you
I
did.
put the word render.
Oh,
Thank you. All right, so we got our 0. That's great. Let's add a button. Right, this will say, this is, we'll say add 1. Just so we're clear here, right? We'll just make a on click. We'll have an anonymous function. And we can say set count. So I'm technically referring to a count that's already in state, right? So I'm actually referring to our current state. So if I'm updating our current state, I should be passing in a callback function. So I'll say prev count plus 1, right? And we'll also have an add 2. And we'll add our 2. Okay, so now we've got this. So we should have an add 1, add 2. Okay, any questions so far?
forgive me. Could you explain prev count real quick?
Forgiven. No. Yeah, sure. Well, I had to answer that way. Sam's rolling her eyes. She's like, Doug, you don't know what you've missed the last 10 months in this class because Corey makes fun of everything. She's like, I'm so embarrassed right now. Don't worry. You're in my class is no reflection on you. Okay, so we could write, right, so maybe you're used to writing it like this, right? Which is also okay. That's this one. For problems like this, it won't really cause an issue. But when you have multiple set states lined up, the way those get resolved is not necessarily in order because of the asynchronicity nature of them. So if you're doing like things that depend on a previous state, there's not a guarantee that it will be the same if you refer to that state like so. This is because a lot of the set states actually get merged. At least this was the class. I haven't read this about functions for a while, but they all get merged into this one set state call. So depending on the order that they actually hit, you could get a different state. So when you write it like this is passing in a callback function. and we're using closures to close over the current value of the variable at this exact time that this is called. And so this previous count will be for sure what it is when I click this button, which is referring to this count. I don't know if does that make sense, Doug?
It does. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Any other questions on this one? All right, so let's throw our error so we can get there. So we can say something like, hey, if count mod 5 is equal to 0, who knows the bug that's about to happen? Throw error wonky count. Anybody know what's going to be wrong with this ahead of time?
It'll defaultly be 0, so it'll
Hey.
immediately.
Perfect. Isaiah, very nice. Right? This defaulted to 0. So let's just do a quick like count greater than 0 and. Okay, so then we get that. Okay, so I don't want to like spoil the fun here. Okay, so we'll see what happens next with you. So I'm going to open breakout. So hopefully everybody's caught up now on the counter, so we don't have to worry about coding any. I think we already should know. Let's focus on the new stuff. So I'm going to open breakout rooms again for, let's try to push it for just 5 minutes because we're just, we'll do 6. Like, how far do people get? Interestingly, the numbers are pretty similar to before. All right. I'm glad we used more time. Here it is. Here are the results from that. Let's go over it real quick. So let's go ahead and pretend that we actually want to make a specific error boundary just for the counter, right? So whenever there's a counter, that's when we want the error. So if we wanted that, let's create our new error boundaries. So we'll say like counter error boundaries.js. And I think I can like make class components. Nope, I can't. Export default class. Anything to not really type it. All right, well. Okay, so we'll say class counter error boundaries. And this is going to extend React.component. Don't really need a constructor there, but I will make a state. Just for fun though, because maybe some people are more used to seeing constructor. I'll just do that. If you're not used to it, don't worry, just ignore it. This state, and we'll have our has error, which will be true. And then let's go ahead and, oh, I'm getting a message in the chat. Let me check that. RAFCE. Thanks, Brandon. I wish I'd seen that a second ago. Oh, well. And we'll render. And in our render, we'll just check if this .state has error. Let's return something else. So, okay, we'll just return a div. And now let's make it special. I'm gonna grab this thing that I have from earlier. It's just you'll see. Otherwise, we'll just return. This is a React fragment, in case we're unfamiliar. This .props.children. And let's export default this. Error boundaries. So now we have this, so we should have, what are we missing? Don't all jump in at once, please.
the static
Yeah, static.
get divided state from error.
Exactly. Get derived state. Oops. State from error. This is going to take in an error, although I'm not going to really use it, and I'm just going to return has error and true. I'm not going to worry about component did catch because I'm not going to log my error anywhere. And so if there's an error, I should show whatever this GIF is. And so let's go ahead and import that counter error boundaries. We'll stick our counter in here. And let's actually make 2 counters just to really nail in our point. So, oh, something already went wrong. Fascinating. Well, that, I wonder what went wrong. Probably something to do with,
The has error is default to true.
right. Right, we don't want it to default to true. Nice catch, Isaiah. Right, so we've got our different counters. And when one hits 5, something went wrong. Well, remember, this is only happening because it's in development mode. This is what it looks like in production. But this counter I can still continue to use, at least until I hit another thing that's divisible by 5. All right? So this error can occur, these errors can occur in a few different places, and I'm just going to want to write these down in the notes for people. So I'm just going to put this in error boundaries. And so this catches errors that occur in rendering, lifecycle methods, and constructors of whole tree below them. So it doesn't, if there's an error in this constructor, it doesn't catch that, right? It only catches its children's errors. That's like my mother. And so, no, my mom's great, but she's very aware of my errors. And then, so what does this not catch? So this does not catch errors inside event handlers. Okay, so error boundaries is not a replacement to try catch. This does not catch error for event handlers. So if you have an Axios request and you have a try catch there, this does not catch that error, right? Use try catch for those. Okay, this only catches errors from rendering, lifecycle methods, or things that happen in the constructors of a child. Okay, that's the errors that our error boundaries catch. And like, I'm sure you've seen errors sometimes where it's like, hey, cannot call this property of undefined, and your whole app breaks, right? So an error boundary I would catch that, right? So it could say something went wrong instead of having no app, right? So you've probably seen that in life. I don't necessarily need to replicate that. If I wanted to, it would be something like if I had this kind of weird array where I wanted an array of people, and each item I thought was going to have names, and then I thought it was going to have a first and the last name key for whatever reason, and an age of, and then this is a different person, right? Let me just, so it's clear. Alejo. I think it's Franco. Franco, right? I don't know.
That's right.
Ah, yes. I like it. It almost rhymes for the right person. Right, and so let's just one final demonstration of this. So let's go ahead and add a new file called person. Oops. Person.js. And like, this is really going to be bare bones, but like, let's say that this just takes in the names object for whatever reason. And we wanted to return some div that had like names dot first name plus names dot last name, right? And you'd be like, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. I mean, this isn't really a great way to write this. I'm just kind of forcing an error here. Syntax error still break your app, right? So if I wanted to do that, and then inside of my app, I did something along the lines of people dot map, sorry, and I had a person, and then I wanted to put inside of my people component, I called it person, right? Yeah, person, and I just wanted to pass in names, and I did person dot names, right? Just as an example. This is going to break the whole app because I don't have first name on undefined, and I'm not using error boundaries, right? Again, if I were to put all of this inside of an error boundary, we'll go back to the original error boundaries. My app's no longer going to break, but instead says something went wrong. To narrow this down even more, let's say I still wanted it to show the people who really did have names. I would move the error boundaries like so. And I would still see Corey and Alejo. Okay, so this is just kind of like just the third and last example. Okay. Can it catch me outside? I don't know what that, Vanel, what do you mean, can it catch me outside? I don't know what that means. I'm so sorry. So yeah, it just catches any errors that have occurred in a constructor or a render or a lifecycle method in a child component. Okay. Any questions at all for anything we covered today? How about that?
Can you put your code again? Sorry, Corey.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, this is a little messy. Let me clean this.
Oh, you put it inside the map. Okay, that's what you did. Perfect.
And this will all be in the same Git repo that you shared before too, right?
This will be, yes.
Okay, cool.
I'll put it in right now.
But thank you so much. This was a really good class. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's nice. New favorite student. Awesome. Finish errors. Okay, so now it's definitely up there. If there's no other questions, we're just gonna do what I promised we'd do at the very beginning, which is one more shot. Are we ready?
I have a question.
Oh yeah, okay.
Should I wrap all my components in error boundaries from here on in?
Well, I don't know if I would wrap every single component, but at a minimum, you should wrap your entire app in an error boundary. How granular you want to check for every single error is up to you. I would probably wrap my whole app and maybe something that's not my nav bar, so like someone can still navigate away in the event that there's some error. And then, you know, if I'm really writing some shady code where there's just errors like constantly, I guess I'd wrap things a lot more. But at a minimum, you should write some things. It's very easy to add it to your current apps. Good question, Alejo. All right, let's launch this poll. Let's see how we do. Still waiting for just a few more here. 6 more. I hope we improve. I think we will. We're still waiting on 5. Come on, 5. Keeping it alive. 4. Come on, you're making the rest soar. Let's go. 3. What do we see? Answer these questions. Here we go. I think we stopped last time with 24 instead of 27. I think there's like 3 people who maybe aren't participating that much. So I'm just going to give them 1 more second. All right, that's it. And end the poll. Let's share the results. I haven't looked at these. Okay, let's go over this one more time, and then the class is over. Error boundaries can be used with hook use error boundaries. We wish, right? This is maybe if you're watching this video a year from now, 3 people are right. But since we're watching this today, 3 people are wrong, right? You can only use error boundary the error boundaries must be a class component for now. Error boundaries can catch errors that happen in their component. We got a few people, right? They can only catch errors that are occurring in their children. Okay, write that down. If you are one of the 7, write that down.
Can you repeat that again? My fault.
Yes. Error boundaries catch errors that occur in their children. So if an error boundary has an error in its own constructor, it does not catch that. If that error boundary is inside of another error boundary, well, then that one will catch it. Still big improvement overall. Okay, you can have multiple different error boundaries in one application. Boom, 100% of people said yes. I'm very excited to see that. We literally have 2 happening right now in that other app we built. Choose all lifecycle methods that are related to error boundaries. Okay, we got 92% of people who did choose state, get derived state, and 92% said component to catch. Those are the only 2, right? For something to be an error boundary, it must have at least one of those 2. So it can have both, it can have 1, it can have 1, but if it doesn't have either of those, it is not an error boundary. Let's keep going. Error boundaries are used to log errors and fallback UI. That is correct, right? 92%. Kick ass. And we did better on the cat one. 60% of people said cat, that was the best animal. But I did say wild animals still accepted, so we really did better overall. We got
Hey, Corey, can you
72%.
just leave the poll up for like another minute?
Yeah, sure. But I am going to stop the recording. And